Hey guys, I am going to try to keep me in view and we'll see if I can work that. So you can see me. So I can, if I do hand gestures, I'll be able to see that well. All right. So we are looking at the impact of the triangular trade. This is a really complicated lesson, but there's a couple things that you need to know. All right. I'm going to prove to you, number one, how Europe exorbitantly benefited from the triangular trade. It's going to absorb resources from both the Americas and Africa. It's really going to fund the rest of the modern world, which is really kind of an important aspect. A second thing we want to do with this triangular trade, we want to see how it negatively impacted the African economies. We're going to see that at the end, African economies lost both labor and capital. And I'll tell you, it's one of those things as historians, we attempt to kind of weigh those two. What's the most significant impact? Is it the capital loss or is it the population loss? And I think emotionally, we look at the population, and economically, we'll look at the idea of capital. But as historians, I'm going to let you choose kind of which one's the most important. Then the third thing we're going to look at is how the Americas are really going to lose some of their raw materials to Europe. So as Europe is processing the raw materials of Americas, I need you to think about that is impeding the economic development of the colonies. So those are the three things that I really want to kind of do. I hope that makes sense to you. We already lectured this in class. And I want to make sure I'm crystal clear on this. All right. So I'm going to try to do it faster than I did in class. We'll see what happens. All right. The first thing we want to do is make sure we draw our triangle. And the way I want to start it, let's start here. From Europe to Africa, we're going to get manufactured goods, right? Then we're going to see the African slaves are then going to go into the Americas. And then we're going to get raw materials from the Americas into Europe. Okay. I'm going to quickly talk about, I'm going to use sugar, right? So you guys should already know these are the sugar factories over here. And this is really going to be what funds this entire system. It's crazy. Sugar at one point was more valuable than even gold was. Is that cray cray or cray cray, right? I know I'm stupid, got it. But it's totally crazy. Sugar was this brand new thing that just is going to be so valuable. But let's go ahead and look at it. All right. So what we're going to do, the raw material is going to go over here. It's going to be sugar, right? And as they process sugar, they're making it into what we see as sugar, right? Sugar grains. But the byproduct is molasses. Molasses, a byproduct, usually means you just throw it away. So what is it worth? Nothing. It has no value. It's a byproduct of the process of creating sugar. Well, what happens, some Europeans realized if you ferment molasses, you turn it into rum. So what would happen then is the manufactured goods would be then transported here, sold into Africa. And if we want to use the rum as an example, rum would be an example of a processed good that at one point had no value. So valueless, then they turn into value, and then they sell it to Africa and the rest of the world. That makes lots of profit. That's one of them. Then you see guns, I think clocks. You saw some other things in your power map. I hope you did. All right. So that's what happens there. And then what happens is the Europeans transfer their wealth that they're getting into the purchasing of slaves. And this is going to change the nature of the African slave trade. African slave trade, there had been some slave trade that had existed during this time period, but this is the first time in world history that I know of there is a forced migration of slaves. And what happens here, it goes back to this desire, right? We're going to see that the sugar needed many farmers. The Europeans didn't want to do it because of the climate and some other things. So now there is a need for labor. Well, that's going to be where the Europeans exploit. the African slave trade. And they're going to bring the slaves into this. It's forcible migration. And this is where historians argue. Is the population stolen away, or was it an economic transaction? There's evidence for both sides. I, as a historian, with the things I've seen, I'm on the more of the stealing side than not. But again, that's going to be for you to kind of process. All right. Well, and then the slaves then are important for the raising of sugar, and then the sugar is transferred, raw materials, then brought back and over here. And that what we see now is this new trade pattern. Sometimes we call it the transatlantic trade route. Clearly, this is more important than the Mediterranean. Another key difference, right? A key change from the medieval to the modern world. We no longer see the Mediterranean as the center of all trade. Constantinople has lost significant value. And now we're looking at the transatlantic. And again, there's a ton of stuff there. But I just described this, okay? Now, I'm going to now talk about why this is so important. All right. First thing I want to do is, how does it negatively impact? It's going to negatively impact, and again, I'm assuming you know all the stuff I've just read about. Okay, I'm going to clean it up a little bit. All right. So what happens here as the West Africans begin to buy the cheaper manufactured goods from Europe? That means their money is now no longer staying in West Africa, but is moving up. The merchants, they sell individual products, but when they sell the individual products in mass, the profit they turn into, it's not just money, it becomes capital. So West Africa is going to lose a significant amount of capital in this disbalance of trade as you begin to see more European manufactured goods, such as clocks, guns, rum, etc. Okay, you're going to see the purchase, and what happens? That's going to lead to a kind of a migration, if you will, of that capital. Europeans are going to greatly benefit from that. Unfortunately, since they're spending their money on European goods, the local cottage industries, the artisan ones that are and again, artisans, the beautiful products, but they're very expensive. Doesn't matter where you are. Artisans, great products, really expensive. So now all of a sudden there's less demand for that. So those cottage industries begin to collapse. And once they collapse, that means there's no infrastructure to hold on to money. So what does that then do? More capital goes to Europe. So therefore, in the process of the triangular trade, there is a significant loss of capital that leads to the shrinking of infrastructure that keeps Africa from advancing in the modern era. Really important to see that. Now, with that said, let's talk about the Middle Passage. Whoop, that's not what I wanted to do. The Middle Passage. This is the Middle Passage. And again, I encourage you to watch videos. Go to YouTube, search Middle Passage. On Monday, I might put up a video that you guys can look and watch. The Middle Passage is a horrible moment in time. It is where European merchants, pack in Africans, shoulder to shoulder, basically, crammed into the hull of the ship, and they're treated like cargo. Once the Europeans treat Africans as cargo, I talk about how that dehumanizes them. It's not that the Africans losing their humanity, it's the way Europeans view them. Once the Europeans don't see humanity any longer, they're going to treat Africans as products, as labor, as those aspects. So they're not going to see the humanity side. And this really opens up the door for some of the worst atrocities of the slave trade. And again, check that out. Really intriguing, horrifying, so saddening. But that's what we want to, that's that huge negative outcome. But with that, I want to point out that you're going to have millions of Africans being forcibly migrated into the Americas. That's going to cause a loss of labor. So now there's three factor production. land resources, right? Capital and labor. We've already proven that capital is being absorbed by Europe. And now we're seeing the loss of labor through the depopulation caused through the Middle Passage and the African slave trade. So without labor and without the population, or excuse me, without the labor and without the capital, the African economies are going to struggle to evolve in the modern world. Huge outcome. That's one of my learning outcomes. I hope you saw that. Now, on the flip side, when we look at sugar, timber, and other raw materials that we see, these raw materials are really going to be inexpensive. Instead of being developed in the Americas, they're going to begin to become transported and they're going to be manufactured by the Europeans. I've used sugar into rum, right? Molasses into rum as an example. And ultimately, we begin to see that Europeans benefit on the triangle trade in two ways, twofold. They reap the rewards of the African trade, and they're also reaping the rewards of having these colonies. And since they're their colonies, they don't have to pay for the raw materials. They have to pay for the transport. So therefore, Africa and the Americas are not economically developing. This is really going to be that idea of the modern world I've been trying to get through us. The modern world is really going to be a Eurocentric, Europe-dominated globe in which Europeans are going to get really wealthy off this global trade. And now what I've done is I've used the triangle trade to prove that. It's one aspect of it. I hope that makes sense. And I'm going to close it up real quick. So the triangular trade negatively devastated the African economies because they lost labor with the depopulation and capital with the collapsing cottage industries to the other areas. Additionally, the Americans are not going to develop their natural resources, so their value is only natural resources, which then is sending it to the Europeans to benefit. So the Europeans benefited on the twofold nature. Now, when we get to the exchange and impact, ultimately, I also want to point out that with the Africans being migrated, we're also going to have a cultural impact in these areas too. We'll discuss that later. I hope that helps out. If you guys have questions, please message me through Schoology.